I'm Danny Benjamin. I'm professor of pediatrics at Duke University, and I'm the principal investigator and the chair of the Pediatric Trials Network. A fundamental premise of good drug development is that if you get the dose wrong, nothing else works. If you get the dose wrong, it won't work in your patients. If you get the dose wrong, it won't be safe in your patients. So the foremost thing that you have to do in drug development for children is get the dose correctly. Now in children, the differences between how they handle drugs and how they break down drugs and how they get rid of drugs is very complicated compared to adults. And part of that complexity is that children have developing bodies, and so they have developing brains, as any parent of an adolescent will tell you. They've got developing livers and how enzymes that break down the molecules in their livers change from day to day, week to week, even month to month in very early development. They have different kidney function, how they get rid of drugs. They have different skin integrity. Their blood-brain barrier is different. And all of these aspects of their anatomy and their physiology and a part about growing up acts together like a complex roadway. And so just like it's very difficult to predict traffic jams on our highways, sometimes it can be very difficult to predict whether or not children will be very much different in their metabolism from drugs than adults. So the differences between children and adults are very profound, like 5-fold differences, 10-fold differences in the amount of dosing. And if you get the dosing wrong by 10-fold, the drug's not going to be safe and the drug's not going to work. Prior to 1998, pharmaceutical companies were not required to study drugs at all in children. All they had to do was put a little line in the label that says, "We haven't studied it in children, and so you probably shouldn't use it then." Well, if you have a child dying of overwhelming sepsis in the emergency room, or you have a baby suffering from meningitis, or you have a child dying from an asthma attack, and you have a drug that is shown to work in adults, as a pediatrician, you're literally forced to try it in children. So prior to 1998, all drug companies did was said, "Hey, don't use these in children. Good luck. We will profit from selling these in adults. The market is really not there for us to benefit from selling it in children." So almost anything that came onto the market prior to the year 2000 was not studied in children. These molecules, as they age, come off patent. So for the drugs in 1998 that were coming on patent or are now on patent, Congress fixed that problem with some legislation that gets renewed every 5 years that forces drug companies to study the drugs in children. And provided that Congress continues to force drug companies to study the drugs in children, that problem will continue to be solved. For the off patents, it's another matter entirely. Once a drug gets to be around for 10 or 15 years and it goes off patent, any company can make it and it becomes a generic. And that's very, very, very good for pricing. It's good for the economy, it's good for the healthcare system, it's good for everybody. The problem is, once a drug goes off patent, no one studies it anymore. No one's required to study it anymore. The generic companies, all that they really have to do is do a small study in adults to show that maybe the drug is close in dosing in healthy adults to what the original parent or innovator molecule was. They never have to do the studies in children. And so for all of these drugs that are older drugs, which is the most of the drugs to which children are exposed, we really don't know the efficacy, we really don't know the safety, and most importantly, we don't even know the proper dose. What we know about the off patents is that children have different responses to drugs than adults. The second thing we know is these differences are not only profound, 10-fold different, but we also know that we can't predict when the exposures in adults are going to be the same as children, when they're going to be close, or when they're going to be wildly different. And the third thing that we know is that unless Congress mandates the study of these drugs, drug companies will not study them in children, full stop.